So now we've officially begun taking a breath and connecting with the I and the us, and we're going to just have a 5-minute review of last time, just a few comments from last time, and I want to start with what I most want you to have carried with you this week. Lots of things, but I'm just going to say a couple. One is the parallels of living conversation with focusing, that need to slow down, to pause, the all importance of the focusing attitude, of the openness, of the receptivity, the essentials of listening to what the person is trying to get at, and speaking from your own experience, speaking from what's there for you in the moment. Those parallels to focusing, I want you to have sort of metabolized and digested, at least to know that they're there. The other thing that I'm hoping that you carried with you was something that came spontaneously, really, from me. I think it was when Rachel said, what do we do to make a conversation safe? Or what do we do in a conversation that isn't safe? And I remember saying that that knowing in our bones what a living conversation is like, knowing its ways, knowing that it is always a possibility, knowing that that it's there for us is our greatest empowerment. In order to face the dead conversations that we need to face, or the conversations from hell that we touched on last week, we need to really know the ways of the living conversation. And that's what we're trying to do in this workshop, is just to get to know it and befriend it and remember it and treasure it and wrap ourselves in it. In that. I mean, often what we do is withdraw or retaliate or sink to the hellish conversation of just hurling what we know at the other person when they're hurling what they know at us, and trying to get to the facts and establish our right. We all get reduced to that. And knowing the living conversation, the way of remembering that there's something more than that. So just a couple of comments from you. What did you take with you from last week?
I felt like the idea that it's a living conversation reminded me that it's what we create together is bigger than either one of us, you know, and same with a group. And that's a very profound thing, to make something new happen that couldn't have been made otherwise.
Yes, isn't it?
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea that the conversation has a life of its own and we can't control it, just like a child that we've given birth to. We can't control it. And it's always surprising. And it has its own ways, it has its own nature. And there's something so exciting about that. We don't know what it will be tonight, right? What this organism that's the living conversation will be. And there's a whole thing about that I'm hoping we're tiptoeing into, which is what I call us thinking. That instead of thinking about the individuals that make up the conversation and who said what, which we have to do that too. But there's also the conversation itself that has its own needs, its own readiness, its own ways. And to be listening to the conversation as well as the individuals is really a wonderful skill. It's listening to what I call listening to the dance while dancing.
I don't know if you covered this yesterday, last time, because I wasn't able to be there, but that there's always a more that comes in a conversation, in that being, it being bigger than just the two. There's a whole felt something that emerges where there's always a more.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Charlotte. There's always a more. And we're going to talk about that tonight. That sense that the conversation is on that deeper level where there's always more and more and more. So if you hate what somebody is saying or how somebody is being, it's like the weather in Ireland. I don't know if Derek is here tonight, but you just take a breath and it's going to change. It's going to be a more, especially if you don't keep the person in the rut of having to say the same thing over and over again, because you're not receiving it. There's always a next step. I think when I was saying how it's parallel to focusing, I didn't say, and we need to say, that it's parallel to focusing because it carries forward, it develops in small steps, and that more of the conversation is thickening and developing and growing in small steps.
I was just going to add to that for me, what stood out was also trusting, like the element of trusting that there will be a more, and not trying to control the conversation, or and having a sense of like adventure and like playfulness with it, but really trusting the life of the conversation itself.
Absolutely. Trusting the life of the conversation. I love that. And I love the way you said that. And the playfulness in the trusting. And I was thinking when I asked people for, what struck you, and there was a little pause. And a pause is such an important event in focusing. We need that pause so that we can go inside, which of course isn't inside, isn't separated from outside, but we can find ourselves and the next thing can come. But in that moment when I first asked and there was a pause, there's a little feeling like, oh, is that okay? Will somebody speak? And I think that the pause takes trust. And I was having a conversation about this with Steve. I don't know if he's here now, is he? He may be coming on in a bit. But we were talking about how a pause takes this faith that you're talking about here, that something will come. And many times we fill up the space because we're afraid to take the chance to let the pause do its work and have the next thing come. So sometimes people will say something in a conversation and then they are afraid to just let the silence be after they say it. So they say more and more and more. And then what they've said sort of gets buried in the words. And often that's a fear of that allowing and faith that it's working, that people are digesting what we've said, that people are there, that the thing is happening. So that gave me a good opportunity to remember to say that. I want to make a few remarks about conversation and the metaphors that can hold it. And then I'm going to invite you to focus on a particular conversation that you've had in your life or in the week or in whenever that was a living conversation. But first, I want to talk about some of the metaphors for conversation. One of them is that a living conversation is a practice, like we talk about a spiritual practice or any kind of practice. A practice is something that you don't do for the conclusion of it, but for the experience of it. It's process oriented when we meditate or the practice of singing a song together or chanting. We don't do it to get it done or to get a result. We do want to get better at it, but we do it as a way of entering into it. So we want to think about a living conversation as a practice, and there's something sacred about a practice, that we're intending to be in it, to give ourselves to it. There's a kind of surrender to it. The second metaphor is that a conversation is like a game. And of course, that's sort of dangerous to say because people will say, oh, you're game playing. But I'm thinking of the kind of game, even like, I know nothing about these things, but maybe like basketball or something like that. Except that it isn't a game. It's not like basketball because it isn't a game that there's a winning and losing, but there's a kind of play that has its own rules that make it work better. And to enter into it and to play that, we need to know something about how it works, about how those rules go. And I sent you in the handout this little thing about the rules of the game. And I said, you know, some people are really like Jim, is allergic to being told there's a right way or a wrong way. And if you're one of those people, don't think of it as the rules of the game. That metaphor isn't going to work for you. But if you're the kind of person that wants to know, well, how do I navigate this thing to make the most of it? What's entailed with getting a ball into a basket or something like that? What do I do with my body there? Then that metaphor can be useful for you. Of course, metaphors are that way of entering into the implicit realm, the deeper realm, because a metaphor is always so much more than the little example. It never quite fits, but it gives us something. And that something that it gives us can carry us into the feel of something. So the third metaphor fits right in there, is that a living conversation is going to a level. And we think of going to the deeper level. And people will say, oh, the level of that conversation was really superficial. You know, when we think in those terms of higher and lower and spatial terms. And focusing is the giving oneself to receiving and welcoming that deeper level that's not logical, not accomplishment oriented, not right and wrong, that level of meaning, that level where we can't quite get our minds around it, but our bodies and hearts and minds and souls are touched by it, that level. And I think that's why Jean said that any conversation that's worth having, there has to be room to say to the person speaking, what do you mean by that? Because that question, what do you mean by that, immediately takes you to that deeper level, what I'm calling the deeper level. And a living conversation is like Jean's zigzag, where you go to that deeper level, but then you find words and you tell stories and you tell people things, and that goes to the explicit level. And then you need to go back down to the deeper level, and it has this rhythm to it. And the last metaphor, oh dear, the time is going too fast. The last metaphor is the metaphor of improvisation. And I love the idea of the improvisational rule of yes and. In improvisation, we're playing with and playing off someone or others, and that idea of the rule is that you don't say no, you say and. It's the going to that yes and place. The example um, that I think of is an improvisational theater where one person says, "Oh, you have a chicken on your back," and the partner says, "No, I don't have a chicken on my back." Now, the first person either has to let the whole ball collapse, or maybe the first person has to say, "Oh, I didn't take my meds this morning. I see this bright yellow and green chicken jumping up and down on your back." But the person has to really do fast moving something and often sort of take it on themselves if there's a no. And this is a very important point here in improvisation, is that if other people in the conversation aren't playing by the rules of the game, to keep the conversation alive, you want to be able to say, yes, and what do you mean by that? Or, yes, and you seem really troubled by that. Or, how is that? It's not, no, it's not like that. Or it could be, I hear that, and my experience is blah, 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 blah. But it's always that feeling of the yes and, of the receiving and then doing something with what the other person said. So I'm going to say one more thing, which is what, who said it before? Was it Bahar said that it's a living conversation is an adventure, and we're finding clues and we're exploring something new, a territory that we've never been in, or had or made before. And that feeling of adventure is a very, very important element of it. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a chance to just see what comes in you about a conversation that you've had that was a particular conversation that's a living conversation. It might have just been a few sentences, might have been long ago. Whatever comes to you, just receive that. There may be a few, or you may have trouble even finding it, but you know that you have had the experience at some point of this invigorating moreness. When you find that, give it a name. The conversation with so-and-so, or the conversation on the street corner, or the one time my boyfriend listened to me, or my conversation with my cat, whatever the name is. And you might want to jot that down. And then ask yourself, what was it about that conversation that felt alive, living? What were the qualities? If you can get yourself really in that, what was the felt sense of it? What was it like? Every conversation has its own contours, its own felt sense. See what this one was. And what made it like that? How did that happen? Gadamer says we fall into conversation, we don't conduct it. How did we fall into that conversation? Or was it a rare case where you intended it and it came as you wanted it to? It has to come. What enabled it to come? Just put your hands up if you're ready. A few people need a little more time. Okay, would anybody like to share, not the content of the conversation, but the name of it, or what made it alive, or what the ingredients were?
This was just a text conversation, which I don't know, that probably might be disallowed, but it was a conversation with the AC, the whatever that stands for, the air conditioning person. And it had that nature of like falling in, but not falling in, but sort of, when you say what came, Lynn, when you were speaking, was just a fourth metaphor of a dance, but not just any dance, like modern dance, and how what's thrilling in dance, said my dance teacher at Barnard, of modern dance is there's a falling and a catching, and there's a thrill of like the movement. It's not dance if there's no risk, or there isn't that where there's something thrilling, you're in the air, you're back to gravity. And so that whole falling and catching, this conversation had a little bit of that quality. It was kind of went into a confrontation, and then I sort of allowed it to kind of shift. The other person came to something of, oh, this is what happened to someone else. And I was able to like get back on his same side. and it just, the conversation dissolved into no resolution, but like non-conflict, and it ended up being kind of friendly, and just, but it was by sort of the following it rather than imposing a particular agenda. And I guess
Right.
part of that was what mattered more was the relationship than the agenda and the ongoingness.
Right.
Then if we weren't going to actually agree over a particular thing, it didn't matter terribly much.
Following it rather than the agenda. And I love that we definitely have to put dance in our metaphors. I love that falling and catching, the movement of falling and catching and risk. Really feel that in my body when you were talking about that.
And to talk about a conversation that I had as a teenager. So that was, wow. That was a very long time, 60 some years ago. And I remember, I cannot remember the subject matter. It was, I remember the weather. It was at night. It was at a boarding school where I think I probably was very homesick and quite miserable. But I remember a big bright moon and scudding clouds. It was October, you know, that sort of exciting, exhilarating feel. And it was with my roommate who I was coming to know. And it was a kind of personal searching kind you might have as a teenager about life and, you know, deep feelings. So it felt risky and meaningful. And the feeling is of relief to express, be feeling somebody wants to hear too. And I want to hear what they have to say. And that was so, oh, it felt so nice. You know, I'm important to somebody right now, and they're important to me.
Yes, yes, yes. That exhilaration of naming something, of saying something. And that sense of the meaningfulness of what hasn't been said before.
Mhm.
Brings a whole kind of conversation. Let's just have one more. Or we can have more than one more. Because we don't have to be as goal oriented because we're having a conversation.
I was reflecting on a conversation that I had earlier today with a patient in my practice. And sometimes the conversations with this person feel very agenda driven by both of us. And going into the session today, I thought, I want to know this person better. I want to be more open to learn about them and not have a particular thing going on that needs to happen. And I mean, the name, what I named this conversation was the ringing bell, because in the course of the conversation, it was really lovely by just staying very close to what he was saying and asking what's the more of that, or, well, how is that? Or he ended up saying, well, I well, you said not to talk about the content. But the ringing bell was something that ended up coming out, and it was, but we were both sort of like, oh, so there was a newness to this discovery of what he was trying to say and how he said it that was very different from, I think, past conversations, and it was energizing, and I felt like, oh, I'm learning more about what makes this person tick. It felt so nice.
Mm. Yes, that when you're really intending not to be agenda driven, you get such reward there, and the sense of newness and the sense of both of you being delighted with
Yeah.
the bell, and
Yes.
the sense of something new happening that you've given air to happen. I wanted,
Mm.
that reminds me of something that Olivia had asked me after the last workshop. What about when you want to have a living conversation in a business meeting, or something that you're really intending outcomes and results? Can you do that? And I was thinking about that and thinking that just as you could use focusing or meditation or stretching or any other kind of practice as part of a business meeting, we would certainly want part of our business meeting to be a living conversation. But that has its own sort of parameters in that time, like, oh, well, let's just all talk about this. Here we have this terrible deficit, and how do we feel about it? What do we want to do about it? What do we think about it? In that time, it's not to make anything in particular happen. So I think that that a living conversation has to be embedded in something larger that is more goal driven, but be sort of protected from, if we want that to happen, that kind of play to happen, protected from the drivenness of agenda. I don't know. I'd be curious about what other people think about that. So if you have any thoughts about that, write them to me and to Olivia. And it's a wonderful question. How do we incorporate this going to this deeper level in something that we have linear structures for? Okay, I'm hoping that we, all sort of have touched base with the experience of a particular living conversation, and and all of your conversations will have a different feel to them, but that there'll be one that you have as a kind of reference. And I just want to say a few things about the skills um, or rules of the game, living conversation. Next time, we're going to do the hard thing of talking about the difficult conversations and how to navigate how to bring a dead conversation or a conversation from hell to life more. But this time, we're just more about what works, and then we can deal with what doesn't work, how things don't work. And we've said many things already about what works. This openness, this surprise, this slowing down, this receptivity, the searching, the naming things that aren't named, the risk taking. And I'm just going to review a few things that you know already, but just to have it here. When we think of the living conversation as an organismic and life of its own, and that each step is going to develop it and grow it, there'll be also a step in you, something that's given to you today. And to be aware when you're in this conversation adventure, stay close to your own experience. You'll go out of it for a moment to really listen to someone else, and you lose touch with yourself, but then to come back to yourself. What's happening in me? What does that mean to me? Where am I with that? What is there for me to say? And then to take the risk of saying what's there for you. Not prejudge it. Oh, that's not relevant, or nobody's going to want to hear that, or but if it's there, and if it's saying that it wants to be said, to trust that and say it. And then to trust that you have said it, to say it, just the one thing, and then allow a silence so that you don't drown what you're saying in too many words. So that's one kind of guidepost. Another one, of course, is the listening. And we've said that over and over again. And it sort of has to be in the front of our consciousness all the time, that we're on the edge of our minds, there, on the edge of our consciousness, listening to what's more than the words, what's under the words, what's real for the person, where they're coming from, rather than just the content of what they're saying. And also for ourselves. And then this idea of real relating as responding to another person from what's there in me, not responding in a way that countering the person, or replying or setting things straight, but in a way that's really a kind of sharing of what's them, what I'm hearing, how they're impacting me, using I statements and we statements. I mean, that's a simple one, right? Rather than you statements, or globalizations. You know, these kinds of people are like this, or the world is like that, something like that. And I guess just to reiterate, one of the most important things, which is that if someone else is not playing by the rules, to still pick up what they say and with it. See where it can go, what it can make. Just like the chicken on your back example, how you can carry that forward. So those are just a few of the guidelines that I'm thinking of. Let me just have a couple of responses, and then we're going to have a little break, and then when we come back, we're going to have an experience of trying out our living conversation with our whole group, and then in smaller groups. But just let's just have a few a few comments of what all of this has done in you. What's there for you now?
Lynn, this is Laura. That last point that you made about if the other person isn't playing by the rules, that you could still do the yes and that you could see if you can carry it forward. And I was wondering if that's like, if you're saying something and somebody else goes on a completely different branch.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. There's something in me that wants, like, yeah, I can support your branch, but I'm losing myself. Like, is there a way in which the yes and kind of circles back and picks up?
Absolutely. Yeah, what a wonderful point that is. If I say something and then somebody says a different branch, then I can respond and say, I get that you're saying that, and I'm not quite finished with what I was saying here. We have two things now, right? To always make room for yourself, to always listen to yourself, because you're also yes ending of yourself, but it doesn't have to negate the other person. Of course, all of these things are much easier said than done, right? Does that seem right to you, Laura?
Yeah, it's like I can see myself, remember myself in many conversations where I'm mad that they're not listening. And either I'm going with them, but inside I'm going, yeah, but what about what I wanted to say? I think this is like somehow holding it, labeling, but without the mad.
Well, or, it depends on the person or the group. In this group, maybe you could say something in me feels mad that you took it in a different direction and I want to go with you, but I don't want to lose myself. I mean, maybe you don't have to get rid of the mad. Of course, in other situations, you're one of Jean's guidelines that's so helpful is that you say what can be communicated, what the other person can hear. And if the other person is going to just get all bent out of shape that you're mad, then you don't want to take it in that direction. Then you might want to say, I really want to go with you, but I'm not finished with this. Right? You can say as much as you can say that the other person can receive. But many times, if you're doing it in a kind of focusing way, I really want to be with you in that. I see you're upset about that, and I'm having trouble doing that. And there's a way that I'm just passionately disagreeing with you inside and jumping up and down inside. You know what I mean? You're expressing the what's happening in you in an experiential way.
Yeah, that says it really well. You're describing what's happening in you in an experiential way. Yeah.
Hi, this is Jane. And it seems the corollary of that is to validate what the other person is experiencing.
Absolutely.
Instead of saying, oh, you'll be okay, saying, of course you feel that way, which is what I have done, what I did in the conversation you asked us to think about. And it opened up a whole feeling, experience between us.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It's so instinctive to tell people not to feel the way they feel, you know, and to tell them to feel a different way. And that's sort of the no and rather than the yes and, right? But to say, yes, I see you feel, you know, somebody says, oh, I feel like a worthless piece of shit and I don't even want to go on. And, you know, my instinct is to say, how can you say that? You're not a worthless piece of shit. You're a wonderful person or something. But the yes and is to say, wow, that's a difficult feeling to feel that.
Mm.
Of course, you don't want to go on if you feel that, you know, or something. It's the validating. It doesn't mean that you have to not say that you disagree. You can say, I don't feel that way, but I know you feel that way. And Gene was wonderful about always ending the sentence on what the other person feels. He would say, well, you know, that isn't the way I look at it, but you feel blah, blah, blah. So he's making a space for his own feeling, but then going back to validating the other person.
Yeah, I was also thinking if someone's going through a really difficult situation, objectively difficult life change or something, and they just feel they can't manage it, to, you know, to validate that it's a really hard thing you're doing.
Absolutely.
Of course you feel that way.
Right. Absolutely. The validation is a big part of the yes and. Yeah. So let's take a breath together. And this is the moment when we're going to try out what we're talking about and see what it's like to have a sort of intentional conversation. It's that juxtaposition of intention and spontaneity, just allowing whatever happens to happen, but also having a deep intention about it. And so we're going to try that out together. But let's center first and take a couple of breaths. And let go into this dimension of the larger, the deeper conversation, the adventure, the place that's under the words and between the words and above the words. Maybe by breathing, by letting go of your body and letting your body go, letting your body be held by the chair. Sort of like getting ready for a trip. We don't know where we're going to be going or what that's going to be doing, but we're ready. We're ready for that. And see as we start, what's there for you? What's there for you in the beginning of this conversation? And that takes a minute. What's there? What's happening and occurring in you? And there are many things, I'm sure. But just give that a minute to feel into what's there for you. And what's there in relation to this group, to this us, to this conversation. Let's give that a minute too. And just see what's there in relation to this community, this group, this conversation. What wants to be said? I love that phrasing. I think that's a Jean phrase. What wants to be said? Or what wants to be heard also? And when you're ready, come back to the group. And we're going to have 15 minutes for this conversation. Or maybe we'll see, maybe just 12 minutes. I think we'll have 12 minutes and just see what can we make in 12 minutes. And now the floor is open for anyone to say anything that's there for you from your experience, whatever is there right now.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, good to see you.
I don't know if you guys do raising hands here or not, but so I was just wondering about that as a practical thing.
Try speaking as naturally as we can.
Okay. Well, so yeah. I think there's just something bouncing around inside me around context. I loved the parallels you were laying out between what you're inviting us to call living conversation, which is lovely. I love the name as well. And focusing. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking about how giving this kind of conversation a name is kind of like when we use a handle in focusing, right? And there's such a power in handles. And yet I was thinking about the thing that I love in focusing that I think is a lot harder in living conversations. So this is like a difference. And it kind of gets to what Laura was saying earlier, which is that like in focusing, it's really easy to know when it's your turn to talk, right? It's like we have this structure and one person's going to take a turn and the other person's going to listen to them and then vice versa. And there is something so comforting and reassuring about that structure for me.
Yes.
Yeah. And so the difficulty that I see with, I mean, I think it's a wonderful difficulty. It's certainly a growth inducing challenge, but it's like, it seems like the context of living conversations is that we're not in a therapy office. There's not a therapist and a client. We're not in a focusing session. So there's not a predetermined structure, but and yet we want to have some kind of mutuality. I mean, I thought that's what Laura was pointing to, right? It's like, I don't just want to listen to the other person. I want the other person to listen to me as well. I want us to both listen to each other. And so how do we invite that kind of basic structure or it's not structure, but that basic reciprocity or mutuality or that dance when there isn't the structure, right? So how is the dance mutual when there's no supportive framework that is helping it to be that way? So that's what I'm sitting here wondering.
That's a like $64,000 question. And I'm just gonna say back to you, but before I say it back, I'm embarrassed to say, I can't read your name there. So you have to tell me.
This is Rosa. Sorry, I didn't.
Rosa, I can't quite see you in that little square because, and I couldn't see who was speaking, so thank you. But that's sort of my saying that is an example of taking this little risk, because it would be very easy for me not to admit that I didn't know who was speaking. And then I said, no, don't do that. Take the risk to say, I'm embarrassed. I can't see who you are. And now I feel much more, there's something that releases in me then. Oh, it's Rosa who's saying this. And I don't have to pretend and cover. So I cleared that space. And then I want to come back to you and say, that's one of the big things, the difference between taking turns and not taking turns. And when we have a breakout rooms where we take turns, it's so much easier than last time we tried not taking turns. And living conversation in life, what do we do with that big challenge of when to speak, when not to speak, how to speak for ourselves if the mutuality isn't there, if the person isn't listening, how do I speak for myself? Let's just see what's there for other people about that. It's like you threw a ball up in the air, and let's see what happens to that ball, who catches it and how they catch it.
This is Ginevra. I'll bounce the ball back at somebody else, I guess. Try to do something with the ball that's in the air.
Name.
My name is Ginevra.
Ginevra, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if this is, so I guess I'm taking this perhaps in a little bit of a different direction from Rosa, but what made me think of this was somebody talking about a conversation from like college and remembering what it felt like to be that age and kind of have all this curiosity and hope and excitement and be able to sort of like leap into these interactions with all the people I was meeting, and how different I feel now, reflecting on how I feel now, where I often kind of avoid getting into situations where I'll have to talk to people, because I have such an abundance of experience of not being met in the way that feels good to me to be met, and such an abundance of experience of not being particularly interested in the ways that people are engaging or the topics they're engaging in, and yet like somewhere in me, and I'm guessing in most of the people who are here, which is why we're here, is this like longing for that kind of conversation that's more like a dance or a, you know, like birds or animals kind of playing. And one of the things that I too have found in focusing partnerships is this environment where it feels at least safe to open up to myself and to my process in the moment, without feeling like I'll be either invaded, misunderstood, whatever, interrupted. And then I can be present for another person without being worried or so I guess I'm sort of echoing Rose's question, or maybe expanding it, that, I think part of what is challenging about living conversations is this conditioning to not really trust that they're going to happen.
Yeah. Yes, it's a big leap, right? A big leap of faith. And I'm also struck by your longing to be met. That I think so many of us have a longing to be met and a fear of not being met. And then what do you do if you aren't met? If there isn't that mutuality, or if there isn't that in you that can be really interested in what the other person is saying or the other people are saying.
I go home and watch TV.
Let's just see what comes in anyone here about that big challenge and that longing. It's like we want to give conversation a chance. Many of us had it in our youth or something, and then have given up on it and want to give it a chance. We want it.
I long to be met, but I've been challenged to be not expect to be met, but to express myself. I mean, that's the challenge I'm facing. That not to be met, or risk not to be met, but expressing myself.
So you want to be met, but you're challenging yourself to express yourself, what's really there for you, even if people aren't meeting you.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. It's scary. It's scary.
Very brave.
In a way, I feel delighted to hear that, oh, I'm not alone. Like, oh, we all have this similar challenge. I thought I was the only one. And when you ask, what if we're not met, or that conversation not going to be interesting to us, that was a big theme for my normal conversations for a long time. I began to, my strategy, I find what's most helpful is I commit to meet myself, no matter who I'm with.
Wow. You commit to meet yourself. Wow. How do you do that, Olivia? How do you meet yourself?
It's in a way like focusing, give me that foundation, and meditation. It's a moment by moment where I notice, oh, I'm so out there for them. I abandon myself, that I just return, this sense of returning, keep returning. And when there are some urge, some needs, I'm learning to, maybe the best thing I can do is say that maybe I need to leave earlier. I couldn't stay in the conversation if it feels too much. Or I feel it's okay to be vulnerable, to share. It's challenging for me to speak up, but I find myself drifting off, or tolerating something.
So you're challenging yourself to speak up and say that you're drifting off, or that you need something, or that something isn't right for you, or that you're wishing for something.
I don't feel it's challenging myself. I really like last time you talk about something about hanging at that edge, not jump off the cliff.
Mm.
So there was a period I was practicing speaking up, meeting my needs by voicing it, but I find myself kind of jump off the cliff. That is actually, if the other person couldn't meet me, that feels worse. So I began to learn how I don't challenge myself. I don't jump off the cliff. I just hang at the edge. Even if I'm not met at the edge, being vulnerable, I can still hold myself.
Mm. Oh, yeah. Image of being right at the edge so that you could still hold yourself if you weren't met.
Oh, I love that. That's one of my favorite analogy about dancing. Well, not about dancing, using dancing as an analogy. I love Argentine tango, the partner dance. And I find what I learned a lot about listening actually was from dancing tango. I need to lean towards my partner. If we don't lean towards each other, there is no dance, no partner dance. But if I give my weight too much, it will be so heavy for the partner. If the partner couldn't meet me, I will fall. So I need to lean a little bit, but in the way I'm so light, and this person can leave, and I'm still not off balance. So that's the best place to dance. And sometimes we're really matching, we're like spin off, and we can lean towards each other a lot. And sometimes it's slow, and we're not leaning onto each other that much, but it's like dynamic and how much we lean. But fundamentally, we need to keep our own center and balance to have a dance together.
Wonderful analogy.
Yeah, that's what I will say for now. I'm noticing how much space I'm taking. Like, feels good enough for now.
What comes for me in hearing about the finding the center and then or a decision to hold myself or to express whatever whatever the response is going to be, even though there's a longing to be met. What comes is a memory for me of a difficult conversation, highly difficult conversation many years ago with a family member, and knowing that my inclination was wanting to be heard or met, and also convincing in some kind of way. And I found I expected that would happen, and I expected that I needed to speak anyway. And so that one of the things that happened for me as I was preparing for the talk was that I imagined or I invoked a sense of my larger self, or the word that I was using at that point was spirit. And so that as I was talking directly to this person who was really important to me about this really important thing, it was as if he was listening in. It looked like I was talking to him, but it was kind of my way of talking to kind of him, but talking to larger self. And it kept me from being attacking, convincing, those kinds of things that would create that kind of energy from which, and there was no need for the person to get defensive. He didn't do what I wished he would, but we got closer. So, and so there's that, and then there's this other thing, I think, in terms of taking a chance, sort of, if necessary, is that there can be that experience of hurt. And so I think having some kinds of hurt and disappointment. So I think that there can be some I speak for myself. There's a need for some kind of processes for being there for the hurt one inside, so that both of those take take the listener or the person we're trying to dialogue with off the hook. So
Yes, yes,
I'll
both
park it there.
about taking the other off the hook by speaking to the larger, and also, by meeting your own vulnerable little one.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
There's
Thank you.
something instinctive often wants to put the other person on the hook. And living conversation usually doesn't happen so well with people hanging from hooks. But then how do we be genuine and not have the other person hanging from a hook? Let's just see if there's a moment, and then anyone who is moved to speak, sort of like a Quaker meeting, just speak.
Well, what Steve says, it's to me, it seems like, yeah, it's not just a conversation between two persons, or if I think you were talking about a conversation between two persons, but then it's a conversation between several persons, like all the persons inside of me, and then all the persons inside of the other person. And so it's almost like a group, a little group conversation. Yeah, and then to be present with each of all these persons and listen to each of all these persons. It's quite it's quite a project. It's quite it's not easy. So many things so many balls in the air. While the conversation is going, it's like, whoa, it's like juggling all these balls.
And then there's all that these people are representing in the larger world, as well as all the people within. I think we have to stop this large group conversation, because I really want to give you a chance to have a small group conversation that will follow up on this, so that you could see the feeling of the difference, and just continue it in your small groups. I would love if we had time to talk about this conversation, but let's keep it in mind, and we'll watch the video of it also. Welcome back. How was your conversation? I wish I could have been there for each of your conversations to hear it. I'm looking at all of your faces on the screen, and I think many of you are doing that too. Just looking at each other and looking at us after we've had our conversation. Rosie, you're lit up. You look like you're going to say something. And just turn the air conditioner off. I'm not listening.
Yeah, it was very sweet to continue the threads that had been started to be explored in the larger circle. And it felt really good to be able to do that in a smaller group and kind of go deeper with it. Yeah, that was very sweet and meaningful.
Well, speaking for myself, I did not find our foursome of lovely people a living conversation. It was a nice conversation. And that makes me wonder something about the words magic and grace and a happening that despite intentionality, something larger and mysterious is sort of like falling in love.
Yes.
It happens, and you're swept into it. And maybe I'm now feeling how rare that is, and maybe how wonderful that it is rare, because it's precious.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to say.
Yes. How does it feel to say that?
Well, I'm quite jumpy inside because, as I was saying it, I didn't exactly know how I was going to end it or even why I brought it up. And I would not prefer to have this element of magic. I'd prefer to have a technique. I say, can you say more about that? And that begins to open it up. And I say, well, I hear you, but I feel, and that's the tip. And so I'm a little disappointed inside that life may be quite unmanageable. I can't exactly manage who I fall in love with.
It has to come. The love has to come, right? The words have to come. But what occurred to me is that I wonder if you had said that in the group, if you had said, I don't feel this is a living conversation. We're all lovely people, but the magic isn't happening. I wonder what would have happened in the conversation. I think it would be very interesting.
Right.
Do you think something would have happened, Paula?
There's also an element of time. And I'm just thinking of the word intimacy and trust. And I don't know, I knew one person there, but I don't know what would have happened if I said the magic.
I think where I'm coming from in that is that often when that it is magic and it has to come and we can't control it. And sometimes when we say what's happening in us in the moment, take a risk. It's what I call talking about you and me. And it could be talking about you and me to an individual or to a group. You know, I don't feel the magic happening in our group right now. There's something so intimate about talking about you and me that tends to be like a genie that calls the magic forth in some kind of way. And it's something that happens very rarely in our culture. People don't talk about you and me. They avoid it like the plague. And it's only when people are in love that they talk about you and me. Right? Or maybe I'm exaggerating, but it's a very rare thing. And because it's rare, there's something very, not maybe because it's rare, because it's so intimate. I don't know why it is, but something very exciting immediately. So when you started saying, well, it didn't happen in my group, I felt excited. Like, oh, that's something to say.
I want to echo that when Paula said, yeah, the magic didn't happen in our group. I feel so alive. And I'm like, that moment, that is a living conversation.
Yes, that's right. That was the living conversation. So I'm going to give you homework tonight. The homework is to watch the video of this session, if you can find the time to do that, and to write a couple of sentences, focus on what was the moment in the large group and the small group that did feel most alive. You know, what was the moment that there were possibilities or a thread? The conversation that's the living conversation is the conversation that goes to that deeper level, that implicit level. And the implicit is out of our control. It's out of our conscious awareness. We just have a feel of it. But there's usually a tail that you can pull on. It's like, oh, pull there. I'm going to get something alive. So write a few sentences and send them to me, and I'll send them to everybody, and we'll share what was the moments. Doesn't have to be the content of it, and it can be very brief. But what was the moment that that there was the most life, or the most felt sense, or the most, well, let's leave it at that. And I'll see you all next week. And if you want to participate in the Community Empowerment Project, or you want more information about it, write to me about that. Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye, Liz. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Jim. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Lynn.
Next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Dorothy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.